All right, hello and welcome back. It's MC1 Gamer here, bringing you a video, just going over some interesting stuff regarding an event that just recently happened with my guest Tom from Warhammer Weekly, who attended it. Hello, Tom.
Hello, friends. How's it going?
So before we actually start, I wanted to do something and just get some feedback and evaluation from you, Tom. I have a new intro that I'm looking to do. I have a video that I pulled up regarding it. I just wanted to, I think it's poignant. I was looking at it actually last night when I was going through, the election cycle. So let me just see if people, and I'll leave it at this after that, if anybody wants to comment on it. But
finally really did it. You made it! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell!
yeah, that's just my my morning inclusion here, or my afternoon inclusion for the day, my reflection. But anyway, moving on from that, I might have to put that as my intro for future videos. So getting on to more pleasant things. So you attended a GT this weekend, and it was very colorful and very interesting. And we're going to be attending a similar one from the same people that run it come February. You and I. That is the Holy Wars and Holy Havoc crew.
Yeah.
So that is, interestingly enough, it was actually showcased on Beasts of War, which is the UK site, and they showed a number of cool pictures. Also, one of our very own YouTubers, Matt Carter, was also there with his wife, with a very interesting and cool army, Nagash and all his Mortarks. But you have a bunch of pictures.
I do. Mortal Realms was also there.
That's right.
Yep. So I mean, it was great. It was a fantastic event. A number of those pictures, some of the more epic of the pictures, I would argue, of the battlefields are actually from Vince and I's, some of our games. It was crazy. We just had all kinds of filth and just huge monsters, and Vince loves pushing around big things, and so I said, okay, if you want to push around big things, I'll build a list with big things. And
I have a small snippet of what Beasts of War showed.
Yeah.
Then we'll get to your pictures, and then we'll talk about it, and we'll see. We're going to go over a little bit of the detail of what was involved, and not too much detail, because anybody who's viewing this, tonight's Warhammer Weekly is going to be talking quite a little bit about this, so I don't want to steal the thunder. But we'll go over a little bit about the scenarios, and about the painting competition and the quality of the armies. And mostly what we'll talk about with looking back at this particular event, but looking forward to the event that you and I are going to be attending in February. So let me just show what the Beasts of War coverage was. So here's Beasts of War.
Yeah, and let me just point out that, and then all hell broke loose. That's us.
I want to point to this thing right here.
Yes,
this looks awesome. And there was a comment that was actually made about the fact that you guys brought some bribery liquor.
Well, we not all of our opponents partook, which was disappointing, because the ones that did,
they knew that it was spiked.
Well, it's funny. I every time somebody took a shot, I took a shot with them. So it's not. I didn't ever try to push it off on them without also participating. But I mean, what I would say is that not all of our opponents did partake, which is disappointing, because I think it was some of the opponents that didn't partake that we had one of the roughest games with, and they probably could have used some liquor. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, I maybe when you say roughest game, you mean tactically or otherwise? Okay, never mind. I know where that's going.
we crushed them. I just don't. I don't know how else to say it.
Okay.
I came out with a very kind of ingenious battle plan. And I told Vince, we're deploying this way. Trust me, it'll work. And it did, to the point where we basically won the objective at the top of 2, like the main objective at the top of 2. So, yeah.
Let's take a look at a couple other pictures here. This is also down here, and we'll go to yours. But just a couple close-ups. This is your Glocken. Here's the base of of Arcane in the back. Is this the game itself?
No, this is our display board. You
Yes,
can't see it, but
this is the display board. What is this? Is it like hot and cold?
Yeah. So it's actually it's laid out in the format of the end times, and so it's this big. It's a plateau rising out of swamp, and then the plateau is all stone, and then above the stone is a frozen kind of another step even above it, and so and it's actually arranged in the order of the end times, and so because the forces of Nurgle advanced first, and then the Skaven came next, which is what you can see.
Right.
In this image, the our bloodthirst or our Scarbrand is actually our Scarbrangelina is actually sitting in the Skaven area, and then on the top is the icy area where Archaon and his forces advance from. You
should have had Johnny Cash playing when this in a loop.
It was quite an experience.
Death came.
Yeah,
that's the line. All right, whatever. That's great. It looks amazing, and I got to say, this picture. It's just like it defies gravity. The height. There was a picture, I couldn't find it, but maybe you have a picture of it where you guys were going against another army with Archaon in it.
Yeah.
And this because of the base of Archaon. Maybe here's the base. No, that's not the base. Wait, the base is over here. We'll see better pictures with yours. This is the base. Just so anybody who's watching this knows. No, it's not here. Oh, it's here.
It's not. Okay. So if you look exactly back, and you see that little frozen. Yeah. So you can see it there.
It's high. The base is almost as high as your entire armies. Like nothing else really comes up at best.
And he towers above that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a picture of him go base to base with another Archaon, and it just looks like it's like not Big Brother. It's like dad to son.
Yes, he is So one of the jokes was that we faced both Chaos armies that had Archaon on it in our lineup, and so the humorous part about it is that in the first matchup, Vince sent his Archaon toe to toe with the other one, and he said he's going to slay the imposter, because that first match was an army that was very closely, probably 60 to 70% of their troops was identical to what our choices were. And so it was like a dark mirror, and it's funny because all of our colors were bright and contrasty, and a lot of theirs were the same colors but muted, and so they literally look like a dark reflection of our forces. And it was that team that actually ended up taking that we tied for best overall with.
Nice.
But we in our game against them, we went 1-1. The total objective points was 4, and we ended up tying 1-1 in our game. But our Archaon slew the imposter in the realm of Tzeentch, which is what Vince's Archaon is aligned with. And so it was a very appropriate story. And then the next Archaon that we faced in game 4, the Vince promised that he was going to murder that Archaon, and unfortunately, that other Archaon just chose to hide for the entire match.
Nice.
And so, we didn't get to kill him, but he basically stayed off the battlefield and never engaged anybody. So
we're going to come back to pictures, because you have a roll of pictures, and we'll see how many we can get through in the time that we have. But let's talk about the event, and we'll talk about painting when we get to the pictures, and because there were some really impressive armies and some really good. It was a tough painting competition. I know it was kind of down to the wire with Vince and his general too, but. Let's talk a little bit about the scenarios, the competition, the narrative, just a little bit about that. We don't want to touch too much on it because I know you guys are going to talk about it a lot tonight. But give us a little, because this was a cool event, and this was probably one of the last events that we'll probably see in organized events that don't have points unless it's a completely open with some adjusted rules. So
I mean, I suspect moving forward they are going to move towards points. So this may be the last event doing what we did. Now, they're points wise, the armies were vastly disparate. There were a lot of forces in the 4,000 to 5,000 point range. There were some maybe under 4 total, and there were some that ours was at 6,300. So we were near the top. Yeah. Now, and the way that this ended up balancing was actually the objectives are what balanced it. And the reality is that the table space was limited because you're playing on tables that were designed for one. It was a 4x6, so it's a 1-player force. You're playing 2 forces. And how you built your forces was you chose 24 war scrolls of minimum numbers. Okay, so like 10 men at arms would be a single war scroll, as would 5 chameleon skinks, as would a single gyrocopter, a gyro bomber, as would
that's
Archaon
I can't
Lord.
Stand that about the gyro bombers. Oh my god!
And Archaon Lord of the End Times. Like all of those are one scroll choice.
Yeah.
But the scenario. So you say like, how's that balanced? Well, the scenarios are based around 4 objectives, and so you're actually literally attempting to achieve 4 objectives simultaneously on all of them. Okay, and most of them that require like objective achievement is putting at least 5 or more models around a point, and if both of you have more than 5 models, you compare how many models you have between the two. So you had to balance high model count with killing power. And so the balance was in the scenarios and in the tables themselves. Like, so for example, the first game we played was on the Temple of Sotek. So it was a jungle, like Lustria, like board, Lustria board. And it was brutal. Like there was like 4 spots on the entire table after the starting zones that we could land Archaon because of his pie plate was so big.
So what did he wind up doing? Was he more of a an enhancer than an actual
participant? He stayed in the back and waited until they moved into a gap, and then he charged into the back line. But again, he was stuck. The other great equalizer of this tournament that I don't think a lot of people anticipated was that most games went 2 to 3 turns. And that's it.
I had thought about that. I ran a couple of events, and some of them were just. This was before the General's Handbook, and there were situations where, because of this sudden death, or I shouldn't say sudden death, the game of chicken in deployment, which I still miss. I haven't played real open play since the General's Handbook has come out, but that's the thing that I lamented that would be lost the most. And the idea of but in that case, you could typically populate the board with a lot of comparatively points to, as opposed to just saying we're going to play this size game, giving you a lot more room. And seeing that in past games, I actually participated in an event with some guys that I was working with for events, and we didn't get past turn 3, sometimes turn 2 the same way, because people brought too much stuff. And even when you did war scrolls or wounds or whatever, the gauge was off because people were still trying to figure out in that first 6 months of Age of Sigmar how to do an organized event. Yeah, and
it went well. We had a lot of mobility, and so that helped us because we were able to get like out of the gate first turn. We were generally able to be pushing on or actually achieving some objectives, especially if they were like kill oriented.
So you think that mobility is a huge factor in terms of how to build for the future?
It's
that's good, because my list that I'm working on now is an extremely mobile list. It's not as massive in terms of numbers, but everything that's there can move or can be put onto the board where I want it to be.
What I would say is that mobility is so my takeaways would be mobility is essential. High model count is essential, not just high wounds, but high model count. Because in these scenarios, the tables themselves get to play. The tables themselves are going to be doing wounds. Okay.
Well, let's go into that. Let's go into that then. If you have pictures to demonstrate a couple of these, and we don't have to go too in depth because I'm sure you're going to go over it tonight. But if you can show like a particular table and say what was the environmental effects of this table that you would have to, let's go that route.
Let me pull it up.
Share, or you can go share.
Okay. Okay. So let's do this. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, I can. Let me go. Okay. Lock on you.
So this is, for example, the Zinch table that I talked about. Unsurprising, what you're looking at.
Can you lock on yourself so it doesn't switch over to me?
Yeah. Let's.
Present to everyone.
Let's see if I know how to lock onto myself.
You just click on present to everyone.
I don't think I get that option.
All right, let's see if...
I think only the host gets the present to everyone option.
Really? Okay, well, then I'll be quiet.
Okay. And if you want to jump in, obviously, just jump in. So this table was a... this is where we played our third game. And you'll notice there are a number of different features. That little floating island in the back is actually a black hole. Like there's a black hole painted on the like floating island. And whenever you passed under there, you immediately took a D3 mortal wounds if you passed underneath it at all.
Nice. Okay.
Next to the pillars, all of the normal pillars, all of the non-pink pillars, so the bluish pillars, if you were within 1D, or if you were within 3 inches of them in your movement at the end of your movement phase, you took rolled a dice, and there was a chance that you would take a wound or something like that. Every model within 3 inches would have a chance of taking a wound. And then the blue eye of Tzeentch was actually the terrain objective, and so the goal was to have more models within 6 inches of this objective than the other player. Okay, but the problem is that if you were within 3 inches, every unit took a D3 mortal wounds every round. Wow. And so you could hump it, which is what you would need to do in order to claim it, or to in order to have a higher model count. But by doing that, especially if you're shoving multiple units in there, it's going to be ticking away damage. And you're comparing with your opponent as to how many models you have around that objective.
And what's the range typically that
it was within 3 inches. It's within 6 inches of the thing is scoring. Within 3 inches, a unit would take a D3 mortal wounds.
So with horde armies, were there ever any concerns about, oh, well, we're close, I have 20 and you have 21? Is that guy really in there?
No, not really. Most people would just were giving, letting their opponents count their models, and doing kind of a benefit of the doubt type of thing. Good. It wasn't it wasn't too tight, and normally it became very obvious who had the majority of models. And what I mean by that is, like, even in deployment, people would observe, would move away from certain objectives if they knew that they just weren't going to be able to compete model count wise for certain terrain objectives. So if they were a low model count army, they might go lighter, because somebody might drop a block of 30 plague bearers in front of the terrain objective.
Right.
That you're not going to be able to outmodel them on those. And so you choose to try to work towards the other objectives. And the alternative is that oftentimes there's a lot of thinning of the herds of these objectives. And so what would happen is that, somebody might start their turn with 20 models within range, but by the end of the turn, they may only have 1 or 2.
I think the theory that I was going over was, if I was going to bring like 100 zombies and at least 4 characters, I'd need 4 characters so I could get the undead, the 6-up save, and then the ability to restore die 6 zombies helps. But just make sure that there's a buff of enough bodies to survive long enough to keep scoring, and then a reserve of some additional 10 or 20 to summon in from the pool in case it gets too low, and just add on to the pile.
Yeah, I mean, that's inevitably going to be the question of, is like, how many bodies do you have, and but it's a mix. It's always a mix of bodies, mobility, and killing power.
Right.
And so there's some, because the reality is that the way that we had designed is that we didn't have a lot of troops. Okay, we had
a pretty good amount in that picture, but
we had the magic aspect of it is that Chaos Warriors were 10 Chaos Warriors per scroll. Okay, but they were 2 wounds each. And so we ended up only, instead of doing like hundreds of troops, we had basically 5 scrolls of Chaos Warriors. So we had 50 Chaos Warriors, 30 Nurgle, 20 Tzeentch. And then we had 2 scrolls of Skaven Slaves, which were 20 models per scroll. So we had 40 Skaven Slaves, but the reality is that we very rarely used all those Skaven Slaves. So, but that's how we ended up dealing with it, and then everything else was high damage. And so we had a lot of ways of just thinning out enemy models. And that was an intentional, strategy as to how we kind of put our force together. But so this is just one table. So this is like the rats and hats table. We didn't get to play on this one. This one had a bunch of like the little pools of terrain were like poisonous. I think the sinking bell tower was actually the objective maybe on this terrain piece. I don't remember exactly, but I think it was. Here is the
it's a desert.
It is. It's the Tomb Kings. It's the Endless Sands of Shyish board, and it was fun. That little like whirlpool of sand in the far edge with the skull and the hand coming out, it would actually like teleport you to any board edge. Like if a model, like if a unit hit that, any model from a unit hit, like touch the edge of that board, immediately you rolled a D6 on a 4-up, you would teleport to any other edge farther than 6 or 3 inches away from an enemy unit.
Okay, that's the distance is a big deal.
Yeah, and then yeah, and so our deployment, like when we played this in board. This is the board that we won real big on. And our deployment was a big part of that because I knew that teleportation was in play for them. So,
all right, next one.
So let's see. We here is that board that I was telling you about with this is the Temple of Sotek. And you can just see that, the big pie plates don't have a lot of places to land. And as soon as you put hundreds of other models down on there, the number of places that Archeon can get a charge is fairly limited.
Right. So when you're talking about the 100 millimeter, 160 millimeter rounds, or even the 120s, the 120 by 90s are probably not that horrible, but the big monsters are usually on bigger bases than that.
Yep. Here is the wormid reaches of Nurgle. We didn't play on this.
How are they? Do you know if all those pools were toxic in some way? Or
I do know that the rivers were deadly terrain. So if you ran or charged, you had a chance of losing models.
Unless you can fly.
Unless you could fly. Right. I know, and you could fly and didn't land in one of those because if you finish your movement or start your movement in one, even if you can fly, it still triggers it. What was it? The worms in the middle were the objective, so you had to be close to that, and they kicked out a D3 mortal wounds to everything probably within 3 inches, maybe 6 inches, and that D3 couldn't be prevented in any way. So the other half of this, by the way, is either you can absorb the damage or you can prevent the damage from the terrain. And so that was something that like all of our Chaos Warriors had the Chaos Shields for mortal wounds. So they had 5-up. All of our Chaos Warriors had a 5-up save from that. I was running a Harbinger of Decay, which was giving all of my Nurgle stuff another 5-up against more wounds and mortal wounds. And we had 2 War Shrines, which were each giving a 6-up save. So every time one of our units would take any mortal wounds, it would be a 5-up, 5-up, 6-up, 6-up.
Right, which I would be surprised if you took any mortal wounds, really. Right,
and like in general, I might take a wound or 2. It was not until the last game that any of our Chaos Warrior units took more than two model losses for the entire match.
That's just a sick bubble of protection. Yes. That's crazy.
Yeah, and it worked out well. Let me say that. So that's the worm reaches. Here is the Orc and Grot table. That's an Arachnarok coming out of like a hovel in the middle. We did our test game against Hooves of Doom, Matt Carter, who's also a YouTuber. The night before, him and his wife, we played them on this board, and it was a fun board. The big thing that was so all of those mushrooms, like the freestanding ones that are close, they kind of look like gourds sticking out of the earth. Those projected a 6-inch mystical bubble around them, which means that on you roll d6 at the start of your movement phase. On a 2-up, no, on the start of your hero phase, I think. On a 2-up, you get rerollable wounds for the turn, which is awesome. On a 1, you become befuddled and do nothing.
Yeah, that's like the worst.
Yes.
In most cases, it's the best scenario with the rerolling wounds. But or is it rerolling wounds? Yeah, it's rerolling.
It's rerolling wounds. Yeah,
right, you roll 1 in a bad situation, which inevitably is going to happen. That's one of those. That's a regular terrain option that always seems to come into play at the worst possible time.
Exactly. And so there were 4 of those that projected a 6-inch bubble, and then the forests that you see in the background up there. Those forests were those, if you were within the forest or touching the forest, they had the befuddle, or they had the mystical element too. And then at the start of your movement phase, that Arachnarok, you'd roll 3d6, and all units within 3d6 inches of the base of that thing would have you'd roll a d6 for each unit, and on a 4 up or on a 1 to 3, they would take a d3 mortal wounds, as the Arachnarok is like eating units and spitting on units and doing stuff like that. And 3d6 can be a pretty big radius.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's is there a way to remove the Ragnarok, or is it just
nope? It's stuck. The one time Mortal Realms, so Stone Monk and those guys, they rolled the destruction command ability to destroy a terrain piece on that terrain, and Stone Monk was like, "I'm doing it, I'm killing it," and Herner wasn't so happy about that, and so I don't think they ended up killing the terrain piece, because a lot of this tournament is about the terrain, and so they don't want, like, it's going counter to that if you're destroying terrain pieces, where many of them are often objectives.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, because even though it's a smart move, in the spirit of the narrative, not doing it, even probably after a long, stern, dagger-eyed look from Steve, I think that was a good choice.
Well, it was actually a very loud shout, but it was pretty funny. Everybody was laughing about it. Okay, so and we played on that board during the test game, and it was a lot of fun. We'll probably talk about this match at some point, but in that test game, Hooves had rolled out with like 100 and some skeletons, all 3 Mortarks, a handful of Morghast, Nagash, and 2 Mournguls. And so I think that they were feeling pretty big, so they came out pretty confident on the battlefield. And we proceeded to surgically remove all 3 Mortarks in turn 2. At the top of turn 2, we assassinated all 3 in 1 round.
Oh my God! What did you think of the theoretical blender capability of the skeletons? Because he had like 120 skeletons.
For us, it never mattered, because again, you got to realize that like we would put a lot of damage on the table, like. We had a lot of damage, and
when you have the equivalent of 6,300 points,
right?
With all the synergies, it's kind of scary. Yeah,
and skeletons die easy. Like, so that's the other half of it, is that there's just very little defenses against a lot of what we were throwing around,
right?
And so they just we engaged them carefully, is what I would say. Like the unit that I engaged, we bottlenecked, and then I came crashing in with Glotkin and did like 20 some wounds. Cut the utility of that unit in half. Or the damage output, because it killed half the models.
Right.
And so, and by the time they activated, there was other combats that were more important to them. Like one of the Mournguls was in combat, and so they had to activate that one. And then the rest of the wounds ended up being done on those skeletons before they could even get a stab.
I want to any of our viewers, because I do have a lot of people that pop into my videos that are fairly new to the game, and just realize that this is a structure, as Tom suggested earlier, that allowed you, based on the war scroll count, not the wound count, not the power equivalency. So when we talk about the fact that some people may have brought 4,000 plus, maybe even 5,000, and they were walking around with 6,300, it's the conversion to the General's Handbook point structure. But the way that it was built for this tournament, you could take advantage of that. And with those extra points, all the characters and synergies, that's why you can get overlapping saves and get a lot of great stuff on the table. It's very killy. It makes sense. I mean, obviously, if you had to take 2,000 or 2,500 points of that army off, it wouldn't be quite as devastating or have as much depth. Well, but it's still, it would be pretty scary.
What I would say is that, like, there was probably at least 1,000 points of our army, or probably maybe even 2,000 points of our army that did nothing every game. Okay.
Yeah, but did they provide buff capabilities?
No. They just didn't make it into combat, or they stayed in our
weren't needed.
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm saying. Like, so, so one of the things about it is that, like, because of how tight the tables were, and oftentimes the actual like area of engagement, you couldn't leverage all of that power. It doesn't matter if you have monsters and monsters of stuff. There's only 2 to 3 rounds of combat of play. And only so many things are actually going to get into fights. And if you have big enough units, hard enough units, doesn't matter what your killing power was, you couldn't chew through that unit in enough time.
Yeah, it's nice to see. That's one of the things I like the most about the scenarios in the GHB. But the legacy of Age of Sigmar is probably going to be revolve around the fact that it's not just about what you kill; it's about the objectives. So as killy as an army is, you still have to achieve objectives. And with these boards being so packed as they were, I imagine that made it hard sometimes. Because I remember in one of the interviews from Beast of War, Stephen was talking about the fact that they really didn't kind of think about the fact that they had these 4 standard tournament-sized armies on a table meant for just 2. Yeah. And with an abundance of terrain, it kind of prevented that mobility. So that must have inhibited some of that as well.
Well, and what I would say is it just made tactics that much more important. It made where your deployment was, where your movement was, that much more important. In our game 4, I moved my Glotkin up. Let's see if I have that table nearby. Yeah, here I'll here. So here's the table. It's so that we played this table in game 4. We were on the left-hand side of the board. And I came up to that fork in the road, right where the defense is, right next to that Skullvein Manse, and I plopped. He was coming down that road with 6 Skull Crushers and a Juggerlord. And I slid Glotkin right up in the middle to engage the 6 Skull Crushers. Because we ended up getting a double turn, so it moved me in position, and I blocked that entire road. And so like the Juggerlord couldn't get in there. And I basically I ground against the Skull Crushers, and they don't have a buffed Glotkin with a bunch of saves at his back, 6 Juggerlords that don't, or like Juggernaut Cav or whatever they are, Skull Crushers. I don't know.
Skull Crushers.
Well, they're the ones that are the mortal ones, not the demon ones.
Okay, got it.
Whatever those ones are, because their bases are big enough. Like it's them, they didn't get the charge on a fully buffed Glotkin. That's going to be a grind that they're going to lose. And so he held that, like he plugged that hole, and he never died. And nothing, like he sat there the whole game holding that line alone.
So fast moving flyers would have helped dramatically in that.
Yes, but you got to realize, like, so on this one we actually set up. Instead of a 12-inch setup, it was a 15-inch setup. So you were deploying almost up against the fence on that left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you were actually deploying like on that rock as part of where the Dreadstone Blight was.
Was that an initial rule? Because I remember, again, in one of the interviews, they kind of added that on because they wanted to make the action happen faster because they didn't anticipate all these log jams. Was that an add-on after the fact, or was that an initial?
No, that was in the scenario pack. So the first 3 scenarios were 12-inch setups, and then it went 15-inch, then it went 18-inch. And that 18-inch, I mean, you're at the 12-inch with an 18-inch setup. You're at the 12-inch line.
You're charging. You're hitting your charges.
Yeah. And we felt that with our setup in game 5. It was quite the game. But so what I would say is that even this board that looks relatively open has choke points that a single model could lock down all of the enemy forces just by clogging it up.
So let's talk really quickly about one other thing before we move into paint, and that is if you want to unshare for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we can go to paint and then we can wrap it up. We're gonna try and wrap this up at the top of the hour, or maybe just slightly afterwards if we go over, but not too far, just because of our schedules today, you and I. Because we tend to be verbose. good for paint episodes. But the scenarios, we've gone over a few of them, and the idea of what how to build your list to try and accommodate the objectives, all those things are important. Was there any conversation on things that were learned that they're going to looking to make changes for Holy Wars? Because there's a difference in Holy Wars and Holy Havoc. Holy Havoc was a team event.
Yep.
Both of them the narratives. For Holy Wars, which you and I got already signed up for, it's an individual event where they initially were going to do 2,500 points with 2,000 up to 2,000 deployed between 1 and 2, and then 500 of reserve that you can use either as a reinforcement pool for summoning or for their Havoc pool, which you could take a chance to try to bring in from any character later in the game at board edges. So there's an interesting dynamic. But one of the things post the game that they had that the council, that the group of guys who actually run these events had said was they wanted to pull that back because their initial thought was it was just too clogged. And I had responded, and it got there was a lot of people that had replied as well, agreeing with me that it's not quite the same. We're talking about 5,000 to 7,000 points of army versus a 2,500 point because you have two people. So they pulled that back, which was really cool because other people chimed in and said, yeah, that we really kind of were looking forward to 2,500 points, which I'm really glad that they adapted to. That was cool. And I understand that they were looking to try and learn from some of the things from Holy Havoc. Are there any other things that they might have discussed or talked about that they learned from this? Any feedback that you had gotten that might come into play for Holy Wars?
Yeah, so one of the things that I advised Hearn, I talked to him a little bit. I've had some interaction with the council, is that I suggested that if you were going, so the two pieces of advice we talked about was, my suggestion was, if you're going to have tables do mortal wounds, make it not preventable. Okay. And so rather than like rolling, so there's a couple different layers. Some of them you would have to roll for the distance of the effect. Then you would roll to see if it affected each unit, and then you would roll to see how many wounds for that unit. If that unit had defenses, you would roll the defenses for that unit. Okay. So like from our units, if something hit our Chaos Warriors, they would make 4 defensive rolls. So you can see how like that one effect is generating like 7 rolls.
So the environment could be like an earthquake type thing. You're not going to get some mystical effect that's not going to swallow up some of your models in the unit. You just have to accept the fact that you're going to lose that model, those models, or take damage that's not going to be preventable. Something along those lines. Yeah,
and so that's what I encouraged, is that reduce the number of rolls, is what I said. And so one way to do that is on mortal wounds, make the mortal wounds not preventable. And I'm saying this as somebody that played Nurgle that had multiple stacking ways to prevent mortal wounds. It reinforces the idea that if they want big games with lots of models, it'll do that.
Got it. One thing that I had noticed when I looked at the rule packet and I saw your video with Vince going over it, is that it was relatively complicated. Now, I've run a couple events. I haven't run anything this big, but I've run a couple of events, and I run a series of ongoing events. And the one thing that And I've been to one particular one where I gave feedback to the people running it. They really didn't they didn't say anything about that, but they continuously have this problem on their events where they don't get anybody past turn 3. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I had said is that if the scenarios are great, but sometimes it's that KISS mentality. Keep it simple, stupid. Or silly, if you don't want to be too derogatory. The more details and the more complicated the scenarios, the longer it's going to take to get through a round. Even though you have 2 people at that event, it just seemed to me like it was a lot to keep track of and a lot to, now that could be also a good thing. It's like there's a lot of ways to get your points. There's a lot of options. There's a lot of ways to if you get stymied here, you could figure something out over here. The problem is the more detail and more complicated it is, the longer it could take to get through a turn, especially with what you just said, which is a lot of rolls. So had that come up at all?
It did. So one of the piece of feedback that Vince gave was that for those terrain pieces, so in our last scenario, which I didn't show what that board was, but it was this ogre board, and there was this big clan rock in the middle. In all units, it gave some special benefits to ogres, but the big thing was all units that were within 6 inches of it got +1 to hit and +1 to wound. And so that corner of the board, just units exploded because they came rushing in with a 12 strong gut star, Iron Gut Death Star into my 30 Chaos Warriors and a Shrine and Glotkin and Scarbrand, and everything just turn one turn, everything died. And so one of the feedbacks was that was more fun than all the units taking wounds from terrain, because we were getting to have the fun. We were getting to roll the dice and do the wounds to the other player, as opposed to just the board doing the wounds. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, because then the players got to own that fun. and got to interact with it. And so, and it was less to keep track of. It was just a static buff. It was an effect that would ding your units. You didn't have to measure, you know, like you just would check, are you within 6 inches? Yes. And you get the static bonus for the unit.
Right. The measuring is the key. Having to measure, having to count up each time. Yep.
But again, it's not per model, it's per unit. And so it's fairly easy to keep track of. You know, like I had a big block of cast warriors. I just kept a tail near the stone, and I just knew that they always had +1 to hit, +1 to wound.
Oh, wait, so it was model to model? I thought it was base to base.
It is base to base, but it doesn't. But the buff was if there's a unit within 6 inches. So you just need to have one model from that unit.
Oh, okay. You make the tail like a model is like a what is it called again? The conga line to your main force. Yeah. Some people don't like those shenanigans. I think that's one of the things that Age of Sigmar allows that you can't.
And we pulled that
block formations. Yeah.
And we pulled that all the time because we had so many buffs that were like area buffs, and so we needed to stretch out our forces to keep everything within range, and it made for neat battles. Like, and if you look at some of our battle report photos, we'll have up later. We had very like abnormal deployment strategies. I
had 200 zombies at one point. I actually just recently thinned out the herd, sold a bunch, and I now only have about, I think, 100 or 120. But I had played a game where all 200 on the table, and I had literally almost mapped out the board with a conga line between 3 different massive clusters of zombies.
Yep.
But they were all 1 unit of zombies, though. So I was able to achieve, like, just complete board control.
Yep.
So that there are ways to really maximize that stuff. The downside, of course, is you have to have all the models. And that's, by the way, a good segue into painting, because this was an event where you had to paint. Now, I've run events that it's very friendly to newer players.
Yep.
And we try to invite people who are either new to the hobby, who are just starting up with a small army, with the Escalation League running at one shop. But if you have an army and you haven't finished painting it, we don't want to exclude you from participating. So the painting requirements have been thin. But this is a different type of event. This is a event where you have to bring your A game, not just in terms of sportsmanship, which is very key. You need to be a good sport in this type of a thing. You're not going to go there and think you're going to manhandle people with your army and be a jerk about it. You better sportsmanship's going to really be a factor. That's important.
It's true.
But
That's true.
You got to bring your quality generalship, if that's a word, but you also have to have an impressive looking army. Everything had to be properly based. The more uniform it was, the quality of the paint. So I've looked at the details on how you score for paint. It is deep. It pushed, from what I understand, Vince's skill set to the max. I know that you're a good painter, but Vince runs an ongoing series about hobby cheating, how to do lots of stuff, and I use that myself. It's actually helped me improve as a painter, and I have a long way to go. But I looked at the depth of what you need to do. You need to cover a lot of ground in terms of skills.
Yeah, what I would say is that it is more in depth than what most army painting stuff is. That said, I don't know that we had to defend excuse me, any aspect of our army, as to what, how do I want to say this? As to okay, do you have enough models wet blending or anything like that? So we didn't go out of our way in painting any of our miniatures beyond what our standard quality of painting is. Does that make sense?
It does, but I've seen the pictures of your armies. There's some good quality painting there.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Vince just is a ridiculously good painter. And then for myself, I knew that every game I had to set my models down next to his. And so that is quite the motivation to get stuff painted.
It's like the hot chick at a bar and her friend.
Yeah. And Vince, by the way, has accepted. So we did not get best appearance. We scored perfect marks. We ended up getting second.
Where was your failing? Was it the lack of synergy between the color or the themes?
It's all Vince's fault. And he fully owns that.
He'll probably say it's all your fault.
No. He fully owns this. He's the one that he openly said this to me when he interacted with Hearn a little bit about it. We looked at the score sheets. We lost out to the best appearance army simply because he refused to rebase his Skaven. And he didn't, because they were on squares. They were on squares.
Oh no!
Yeah, and so it was like he didn't rebase. I had asked him to, he refused to. He didn't rebase, and some of his paint jobs weren't as tight on the Skaven as everything else. I mean,
should have just gotten the way he paints. He should have just gotten a new Skaven.
I know, but he
you gotta razz him for that.
And so, I mean, he's owned it. He's owned that loss.
Okay,
he said, "This is my fault." And I think that for him with Vince, when you get a near miss, that's not like a quit. That's okay, we're gonna double down next time.
Okay, good.
And so I suspect that we won't have this problem next year. Let me say it that way.
Well, let's take a look at some. Yeah, good. Let's take a look at some of your pictures because we're going to get. We have maybe about 15 minutes to half an hour left at most.
You want to look at our forces? Is that
whatever you want to show me? Okay. Anything you want to talk about? I'm interested in seeing. Whatever. Any. Go ahead.
Okay. So we brought. So actually, I made a little bonus thing for the event, and what that is I actually made a. I actually made a book. Like I made a codex. I was inspired by Tyler Mengel when he went to Adepticon last year and made a codex. And so I made a army book. I threw together some art in Photoshop and I made war scrolls for our stuff. So some of this is recycled art.
Is this the book that we saw on the table in some of the pictures?
Yes.
Oh, because I was thinking I was wondering if they'd given you guys the manuals with all the full color printed scenarios.
No.
This is what you pulled. Oh God.
We made this. So I had some lore in this introduction that sets the tone for our army. He's commanded as warlord Akarak to call the legions of chaos dispersed across Gur to war. Heeding the call, the unholy Havoc are the faceless Tzeentch, the horned legions of Myragard, and even Thanquil's own menagerie. Thanquil, or Archon, seeks nothing less than the subjugation of all. He seeks the end times. Beware, for the end times are near. Again. And our force name was the end times. And we kind of fashioned our selections out after the end times and the waves that were seen in the end times. And so then I went through and made this lore page for every single unit had like a write-up.
This is overachieving big time.
And so you can see, and I did it in the design of the end times and how those did. And I printed out one of these books for each of our opponents. And so then this is the last unit description. And then when I went through and I printed out all the war scrolls with the art from our images.
Now that is what I was going to ask you. Are those pictures of your army?
These are pictures of our forces. Yeah.
All right, let's go through. Let's cycle through them.
So that's so here's Archeon back here. I'm going to skip the war scrolls.
Let's skip that because then we can get to just a couple of key pictures from the actual game.
Yep. So there's So there's my Bloab. There are some of my Chaos Warriors. There are the Chaos Warriors that Vince brought. Here is the War Shrine that I put together. I'll have all this up on the PMP soon. Yeah. I have the Horned Legion, and so I wanted all of my models to have horns because this is a Chaos Legion in the depths of Gur, and so it needed to be more bestial. So here's my Glotkin. Here's a total force, or most of my total force. It's missing one of the hell cannons in that shot. Here is the Kit Bashed Harbinger of Decay that I made. Here is my hell cannon. Here's the hell cannon crew. Here's some of my Blight Kings. Here's the actual Blight King scroll. This is for viewers that are under 18. You may want to close your eyes because here are boobies. Here is his Scarbrand Jelena, where Scarbrand has been trapped into a different Bloodthirster body by Tzeentch, and so that was part of the lore at the beginning of our book. We have his Skaven slaves here. You can see the square bases that we talked about. Yeah, it is criminal. Here's his Storm Fiends. As you can see, there's some squares, some rounds for the Storm Fiends. Here's his Thanquil that he brought. Here is his Vermin Lord Deceiver that he brought. And I mean, and these are great paint jobs, but obviously, these aren't up to par with what his current paint jobs are, and so and he just didn't go back in and clean anything up, and he just didn't worry about it. which I get. I mean, I don't want to go repaint old models, but this is what he did. So
it would be a lot to repaint or to start over even if you wanted to make new stuff, and then why do that for big beautiful models anyway? For just Storm Vermin or Skaven Slays, it would be easy. But...
Exactly. So here's his War Shrine. Here are his Wrathmongers. They were called, the unit was the the Voidmongers of the faceless.
Well, let me ask you. The reason why he didn't want to base them also is probably because he plays Ninth Age still.
Yeah, exactly. And he's lazy. And that's the other reason. I mean, we're not gonna lie. That's the other reason. And so here's our Warlord, which is our Warlord. You had to build a model on a 60 mil round, this is on a 60 mil round. Surprisingly enough, and it's a beautiful model. He did a great job with the space. We were in the final 3 contestants for the Warlord models, but unfortunately, the Mortal Realms Davies Savage Orc boss won, and basically Vince's all of Vince's painting was on point. There's no question about that. And I don't know that anybody had a model as well constructed, painted, and balanced as Vince's Warlord in the whole tournament. Like, just this is a showcase model that he did. And if you could see it and get your hands on it, like the snow around the edges where the fire edges are, you can see it melting in the water.
Really?
And turning
nice.
turning into rivulets and stuff like that. So I mean, like, he knocked this model out of the park. But Mortal Realms, Davey did a nice model. He did a great paint job, but he embraced the narrative, and so he actually had the Savage Orc where it as he leveled up, he got bigger weapons. Like his weapons, because he magnetized a full set of weapons.
Nice.
So that changed, and he actually had like a pedestal that he got taller the higher level he got. And it was like stacks of bodies.
Magnetizing.
Yeah.
I'm a magnetic freak.
Yep.
I magnetize everything.
And so I would say technically, I really do feel like Vince's was a better paint job, but Davey really embraced the narrative, and it was a great model, great decisions, great choices, and it looked great. And so he ended up winning the Warlord, the best Warlord. So we placed second in that category as well.
Well, congratulations to both you guys. Let's take 1 or 2 pictures that really encompass what it looked like on the table. Maybe a really impressive moment. Just to give an idea of it's not often that you see this much stuff on the table. I mean, I did once an 8-person game, which was a mega event, which was like maybe 70% of the undead that I have, and against all these other players. And it was like 6 or 8 tables. It was just a huge area, and it was just a massive array. I didn't do a lot of pictures for it because there's a lot of unpainted stuff too, but you don't often get that much volume.
Absolutely.
To play. And this is even on one game table, basically 4 armies. So it's got to be the kind of thing that you would see like a White Dwarf, where they just have these ridiculous arrays of armies fighting each other.
And it was a ton of fun. So I have a handful of photos here that are like from each of the matches. So I'll just show one shot from each of the matches. And so here we go. Let's do this. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this okay, so this was the our first match against a double Flesh Eater Court force. And at this point, we're like turn 3 maybe. You can see the log jam that has happened in that middle of the board, where we just there's no getting by that front line. And one of the objectives was to get to the enemy starting zone, like have models at the end of the game at the enemy starting zone on the other side. And like you can't see it from the floating island, but there's you can see a Terrorgeist wing there, and there's a big fight going on there with some Chaos Warriors. I mean, this one was just a mess.
That was like is that the Lustria board, or was that?
Yeah, that's the Lustria board. And so you can see fitting that pie plate. So where not only he can move within 12, like his 12 move is only 12, he has to be 3 inches away from an enemy starting out. And even a charge, like finding a place to land within the appropriate movement space. And so it was just very difficult. But it was good. It was a nice tactical challenge. So this was one of the battles. This has less big toys on it, but it just kind of shows how cramped some of the boards were. So this is our match 2. And this is the bottom of turn 1. They took first turn. We went second.
This one looks like it's a lot more open and
yeah. And so you can actually see the conga line of Chaos Warriors that I laid down. And the goal, by the way, was the main goal of the table was you had 10 Warpstone shards that could be given to any number of people. It could not be given to flyers was the main restriction. Okay. And they had to get across the board and exit the other side of the board. And so what I did with deployment here is I knew that if they didn't have flyers, I could literally, because otherwise, if you get in a fight, you can always, and there's no other models around, you could just retreat off of the board. Like if you engage near the edge of the board. And if it wasn't going to be carried by a flyer, one of the tactics that I wanted to do was I wanted to deploy a bunch of Chaos Warriors, and if they couldn't fly, they couldn't actually retreat past us. And I could take off models from at any point on the conga line.
So did anybody get off that part of the board? Because
no.
It seems like because it seems like you'd have to have some real good distance to get past that scene, because you can't like you said, you can't land behind them. Yeah,
you can't land behind them because of the way the spacing was. And so what you don't see in this picture is we had actually given all 10 shards to our Vermin Lord Deceiver. And he teleported to this back left corner right behind these the Stormcast on the left hand edge of the picture, and just strolled off the board at the top of 2. So at the top of 2, that happened, and basically I went to the restroom at the bottom of, or at the start of the bottom of 2 when they were starting their turn. And when I came back, all their models had been cleaned up, and so they actually ended up conceding like a turn and a half into the game.
What would happen if you gave it to a non-flyer?
Yep, and granted it flying.
And somehow you granted flying.
Yeah, then it's fine. Yep,
that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh yeah.
Yep. It just could not be a flyer to start out.
Nice. I think maybe my choice of taking Neferata over a Vampire Lord.
Well, I mean, but those are decisions that you have to make. I mean, inevitably, those are decisions that need to be made. And so utility is a big deal, and like that's because the objectives are what matter here, not killing power.
Right.
Like killing power is important, but it's not as important as the objectives, because if you achieve objectives, it doesn't matter if you lose everything. You still get full points because it doesn't matter what units have died. So just something to think about. Mm-hmm. So here's our game 3. This is our Archaeon versus Archaeon matchup. You see the Magath Lords lining up against each other. Archaeon and them are coming in. We have our Hell Cannons in the back. Yeah, this was a good board. This was a good matchup. We ended up tying 1-1 for this scenario. So, but you can just see the big clash of models, and you can see how movement is a really big deal. Where that Magath Lord is in the foreground. In order for me to make that work after their Magath Lord ran up, I actually ended up having to like shuffle the Blight Kings back, shuffle our Magath Lord back, and then have Glotkin come up.
Now the Magath Lord is on a 100 or an 80?
100 just even. Yeah.
Right. And then Glotkin is on a 160, which is like a Lariel or
130.
Oh, he's on a 130, so that's that's a zombie dragon Terrorgeist size.
Yep.
So yeah, that's pretty. You can see. It keeps switching over to me when I talk, though. I'm sorry.
No worries. No, go ahead.
But it shows just how much, because of the terrain, how difficult it would be. Not if there was no other models, it wouldn't be that hard. But because of all the models, it would make it much more difficult.
Certainly. And then finally, here was our game 4. And you can just see that choke point, that setup that I was talking about, where I come crashing in, and then Scarbrand, like everything's trapped behind that front line of jugs, which it didn't matter because this is during our hero phase, the top of our movement phase of turn 1, as we're preparing to eliminate them from the board. In the bottom right hand corner, you see that all of our Storm Fiends have popped up. And our Vermin Lord Deceiver has teleported in. He's teleported Thanquol into the back line. So you can see Thanquil on that back line by that paint bottle. And you can see our Storm Fiends down here. And we end up killing Scarbrand, his Warlord, and Sael, top of turn 1. And we just gutted their forces. And they were hiding, you can see back in the back corner, they're hiding their Archaeon back there.
Nice. All right, so let's transition to looking forward to Holy Wars, because the two of us are going to be participating in that. Have you thought about what you're bringing so far?
I have. So I think that I would really like to bring TK, honestly. But the problem is that I just don't think I can get my force painted. I think I can field a much more competitive force if I brought my TK. But I don't think I'm going to get it painted. And Hearn really encouraged me to bring my Nurgle back because he really he felt like we were, if it hadn't been for Vince, we were definitely in the top, in a top competitive spot for best appearance. And so he was like, you really ought to bring those back because they're really beautiful. And so I think I'm going to bring Nurgle back. But I'm doing a pretty significant revamp in light of my experience here.
What kind of major changes, without giving up your entire list? I mean, we'll do an episode and talk about our lists maybe when we get closer to the event. Certainly when we have some models to show, me in particular. Yeah,
I am leaning more into demons. I had basically no demons. I was straight mortal for these guys. And I need some summoning. One of the things I recognized is that the ability to reach out and project power by dropping 10 models on an objective turn 1 is a real big deal. Because it forces their hand to begin having to clean those off or also have models up there.
Yeah, I have a substantial amount of summoning, but summoning is a question mark with Holy Wars because the concern they had, and I broached the subject, and they haven't made a decision yet, at least as far as I know, is that they want to make it a static summoning list, which is not the case.
No, it's not a static summoning list. It's that your list, 2,500 points, is all of your list, period. And so summoning, when you summon, it comes out of your pool, just like calling to war. Yeah. Right, but that's not what summoning does. It's a substantial withdraw from the flexibility of summoning. The caveat, the thing that makes that not as crazy is that what they said is that you need to have everything painted. Even if you have stuff to summon, you need to have everything painted that you're bringing in. Yeah. Which means if you want to have 3 or 4 flexible units, and we don't know if they're going to do this yet, they better all be painted. They better all be synergistic in terms of the same basing style, because you're going to lose points for that. That would be the kind of thing that would hold back the crazy. And but that's easy to do. I mean, honestly, that's really easy to do. It sounds easier than it is, unless you have a force the size of mine. There would be a lot of things I would by default leave home. But needless to say, there's several things that are in the GT, the upcoming one in February, that very much reduce the power of some of these armies. Now, there's reasons for them, and things like having to roll up your artifacts and your allegiance and all that other stuff. And we've talked about this. That prevents some synergies and prevents some of your capabilities to plan ahead. But there's concerns about that some of the newer armies with battle tomes with their own special allegiance abilities have some advantage. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I understand the concept. And if that's what they want to do, then I understand. But for undead in particular, and anybody who relies on summoning, summoning, in my opinion, has already been really pulled back with the GHB, just because you have a maximum pool, and with the idea that it has a static pool is that much further of a reduction in flexibility. So that concerns me, but I understand why. I understand the rationale why. Did they talk about that? No, not for Holy Wars. What I would say is that the difference between being able to summon at all and drop models in the middle of the table and having to call to war them is a night and day difference. Yeah, why don't you tell the mechanic? Because the call war is not guaranteed. Yes. It's not easy. No. And there's a trade-off. Yeah, and there's a trade-off. And so what I would say is that the ability to summon any models, even if they're models out of your call to war pool, is always going to be better than calling to war. Also, you can call to war seemingly the way that they've changed it, you can call to war and still cast all your spells. So a hero can, like, let's say you have Nefrada, she can cast her.
Because they say that all your abilities on your war scroll are nullified.
Abilities are a set of, and originally that's what the ruling was, but it changed at Holy Wars or Holy Havoc because somebody pointed out the abilities are a set pool of things. There's a heading that says abilities. And there's a heading
that's rules lawyering.
It doesn't matter, but they said you're right. And so what ended up happening is that if you read the way that it's worded in the current rules for Holy Wars, it's like you're still going to be able to cast spells. So Nefrada is still going to roll up to the table, be able to drop, like, is she 2 spells per round?
She's 2, yes. I don't know if I'm bringing her. Thematically, I really need to bring my Vampire Lord. But,
so whoever, let's say she drops 2 spells per round of summons, and then she calls to war a third onto the table.
Well, so, then she does nothing else. She doesn't do her command ability, right?
Yes, I don't think she would do her command ability. But that's my point, being that you would have that flexibility.
Yeah, but all you need is like a separate, like I'd have a White King who doesn't do much of anything else other than maybe buff or.
You're gonna want to make sure that you have, backup heroes, because let me just say, especially,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, like especially 5 wound heroes have a tendency to implode turn 1 if anybody has any power that they can project. Like we ran 2 hell cannons, and if there were soft targets in the back, they got blown off the top of round 1. Because what would happen is, because the reality is that those are also additional call to war attempts. And it's really easy to flub a call to war attempt. And so eliminating low wound heroes neutered an army's ability to bring troops onto the field.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I think I have 5 or 6 hero type characters. In my army, but I think 2 of them are the 5 wound variety. Yeah. Yep. And I took them purely because of the spells or the special abilities.
You did see that it's 18. Where the deployment isn't 2,000 points; it's 1,800 still.
Right. They pulled back the maximum that you can initially deploy, but that's not a problem for me. I already have more than 700 points that I was going to have as part of my summoning pool. My initial thought was to take Nagash, and because how many 2,500 point organized events do you get to go to? And I figured I'd have a much larger pool to put stuff on the table. The problem is that Nagash he's first of all, he's overpointed already, but in open play, not so much, of course. In open play, there's no points, but he's just ridiculous. You can put him on the table and summon an entire army. In match play, rule of 1 means he can only cast 1 spell at a time. And I've played Nagash a couple of times already. And with that rule of 1, unless he has other characters with other spells that he can then duplicate, because that's one of his abilities, you'd only get maybe, and this is a lot, okay, but for his points, it's not a lot. You only get maybe 3 or 4 spells at most off, because he has his own spells and maybe 1 or 2 from, if you are lucky enough to have the points
and
left
each
over.
Summon spell is its own spell. Like, remember, every type of summon is a different spell. It's like summoning skeletons is summon skeletons.
Right. So you need to have those points then also in your pool that you can't exceed. So you're double screwed with the rule of 1 and the maximum points for summoning. Taking the gash he's not worth enough as a physical entity on the table to warrant the points that you spend for a 2,000 point game. It's ridiculous.
Maybe. What I would say is this. So
you build me a Nagash list, and I'll take a look at it.
So Hooves.
I'm talking about this event.
Okay, that's fine. Hooves dropped. Had a Nagash on the table for this event with crazy powerful stuff. So there were Archaeons flying around and Hell Cannons and everything else that multiple Scar brands. He did not lose Nagash in 1 game.
Well, granted, he's hard to lose, but because he gets a 4 up and then a 6 up, by himself.
But what I'm saying is, you can shove him a lot of places and just area denial, just raw area denial, because of the size of his base and the flying and all that other stuff. And then you shove him out there and drop a brick of 40 skeletons, drop a brick of 40 zombies. Like, suddenly, like, the game changes when he rolls onto the battlefield.
But the point, though, is that he doesn't have... He'll do that once. It's kind of like Bugs Bunny when he blows up in that old cartoon. It's like, I can only do it once. He's not going to drop another brick of zombies, because you only have a pool that you can use that. And then when it's gone, it's gone.
So we had a trick so we had a trick in our army for Holy Havoc where we ran. So we had both a Verminlord Deceiver and Thanquol. Okay, if you know the Verminlord Deceiver, he can skitter leap himself or a Skaven hero within 13 inches, and it'll teleport them to anywhere else on the board 6 inches away from an enemy. Thanquol had Warp Fire Projectors, and which is a 2d6 mortal wounds within 8 inches in the range phase. So we could teleport Thanquol within range of his Warp Fire Projectors and spit on 1 unit for 2d6 mortal wounds whenever we wanted. Okay. Normally you would get that trick off once, just once per game, because you're going to drop him somewhere where he's going to die. Okay. But let me just say that dropping him in the backfield for a guaranteed 2d6 mortal wounds was worth it every single game. It only went off once. It only went off once, but it changed the entire trajectory of every single game that we did it.
Yeah, well, it's a little different being able to dish off that many mortal wounds versus plopping down a unit of 20 zombies. That's
but being able
scoring points though, accumulating
being
points.
Able to functionally deploy, move Nagash out into the middle of the table, and drop 3 blocks of 40 models each. Let's say you did skeletons, zombies, and something else. I'm sure that there's something else that you could drop that's a high model.
You better get turn 1, man.
Well, but here's the deal. You're going to deploy what? Nagash and 2 to 3 other models? You have it. Done. Because you finished deploying before everybody else.
That was a big factor,
yeah.
You think?
Yeah. No, like turn 1 is whoever stops deploying first decides whether they want top of 1 or bottom of 1.
Well, yeah, but we would have 1 battalion scroll, which could easily be your entire army, and that's you. I'm done.
Right. And so there may be some of those out there.
Yeah.
But you're definitely going to be up there with the 1 or 2 deployments.
Right.
And so, I mean, what I would say is this: being able to fly out into the middle of the board and drop 2, 3 huge blocks of units, and you change the battle completely.
Yeah, I've thought about it. The reason why I'm not going to go that route is because I don't think that he's just too many points for what you can do with the reduction of the flexibility of summoning. And I don't know if they've changed. They haven't ruled on it yet. The last I had heard was they're going to talk about it. And all that means is that
it would greatly benefit me if they went that route, because I could exploit the crap out of it too. Right. But I'm anticipating that they're going to let summoning just come out of the actual Havoc pool itself.
Right. But the way I'm looking at it is that there's a Grail quest theme.
Yep.
So I decided that rather than try to min-max the most effective army that I could, I want to go for a theme army. I want to mix a little bit of the competitive side, but I really want to fit what is the inherent, bless you, the inherent style of what I'm painting up, which is undead Bretonnians. It's all undead,
which is a win. I totally agree with that. Which, by the way, have you done your Mourngul yet? Have you painted it and based it and everything?
I have the based. I have them both, and I don't know if I'm bringing both of them because that's a lot of points. But I have them based, and I have them with the Zenithal highlighting. But I haven't finished them. They're just enough that I could put them on the table and they won't look awful. But since I'm only going to bring one, I'm going to really take some time with it. Obviously, the one that's authentic, not the one that I bashed.
So what I was going to say is, what I would do is paint him in such a way that it looks like he's coming out of a Bretonnian knight. How awesome would that be if there's a horse that's dead on the ground?
Right.
Does it have a rider or not?
It does not have a rider, and I have the bodies for it, but it does. Okay. I absolutely can do that, and that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
The second one I made, I used the mold to make and wired the base, and I used green stuff to make them. And it came out really good. I mean, it's not as crisp as the other one, but it came out really good. And I haven't really gone terribly far with it, and it's not as rigid as the material that Forgewell comes with. So he's kind of like the secondary guy. It really wasn't just trying to skirt around buying one, for $50 or whatever. It was just to see how this would work. Really, they're 100. Okay, but even so, it was a lot more work. I'd rather pay the damn 100 than what I did. Because so in any case, but I kind of sliced a Bretonnian charger in half, which is their horse.
Yep.
Standing on. So that one would probably be the better one to do, but I easily could add a dead, like the body of a knight, because I have lots of those, onto the existing one. So that's a great idea. I think I might go that way because I am bringing some stuff that's not, doesn't ooze Bretonia, but the bulk of my army, which is like 95% converted, is Bretonian. And I'm not going to go into all the details of it. And we're kind of getting short on time, but anything that's not still would make sense to be part of this army as like as like the Mortarks. I'm not going to paint them in black and gold, but maybe I should.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
maybe I should.
Yep.
I was going to go with the purple because it's also Nagash's army, but hey,
it's true. It's tough. I look forward to seeing your army. I look forward to seeing them roll out, and it'll be good.
By the way, that's one of the reasons why I wasn't going to take Neferata. For the same points, I think that she's better than a Vampire Lord, but my Vampire Lord on a Zombie Dragon is a Bretonian Knight sitting on top of the dragon.
Are you not able to take both?
I could, but that's right there. That's 880 points. Then with a Morn Goal, that's now we're talking 1,280 points.
Yeah.
I mean, where do I get the rest of it?
It's just all skeletons and zombies after that.
Yeah,
I mean,
And I wanted to bring some stuff that I've spent all this. I wanted to bring like my bashed Hex Wraiths, my bashed Blood Knights, my bashed Mortis Engine. I mean, these are things I spent time on.
Yeah.
Rather than go the extra. I mean, I also have the bashed skeletons and zombies, but the idea is I want to try and fit the stuff that has really been made for this army, as opposed to, try to maximize. And if I have one main character, like I think I need to choose that 440 points is spent on some of the stuff that I've got already pre-built. That's themes. That's why I was thinking maybe I'd leave Neferata out of it and just take the Vampire Lord.
That's probably smart.
It's much better.
That's probably smart.
It's not going to be as effective competitively, but I think that's look, it's a narrative event, and I think that it would probably score a few more points just because it's a better theme for the event.
That's probably true too.
So what let's do a video. Let's end off at this with this. Let's do a follow-up video. We could do one or two of them. We got like 3 or 4 months before this happens, and talk about how we're going to prep. They haven't released the scenarios yet, but they're going to soon, and we can analyze the scenarios. And talk
I
about
don't know if they're going to do it soon, because last time for the scenarios for Holy Havoc, lists were turned in before you got to see the scenarios.
Oh, I thought I saw a tweet or an email where they talked about they're going to be releasing them soon.
I don't know. I don't know if that's the case or not. But what I do know is that we had our lists in before for Havoc before we got the scenarios, because you could build your list around the scenarios.
Okay.
So I don't know. I don't know what we'll get.
Well, at the very least, we have to get our lists in by the early part of after the new year.
Definitely.
So if we don't see the list by then, well, that makes sense that they don't want you to kind of customize. But I'm building based on what I'm painting.
Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty. The only thing that's going to change what my painting log looks like is if I'm able to summon additional. I have a true summoning pool. Because that would change. I would be able to take out things in my Havoc pool that are summonable, and then actually have true full units in the Havoc pool that aren't normally summonable.
Well, great. We'll have a follow-up session or two on this, and I look forward to seeing your episode tonight. So anybody who doesn't know, check out the Warhammer Weekly with Tom and Vince. They're going to be really getting much more deeply into this event. I think you have a guest on that is from the Holy Havoc guys, or somebody who pretended.
He was there. I am a terrible person. And it's Kenny Lowell. And Kenny has a Kenny was at the tournament. He brought his Fire Slayers. He, in fact, one of the tournament games, I don't know if it was the second or third tournament game, was his 82nd game playing Fire Slayers.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. That's pretty impressive.
That is very impressive. He's probably the foremost
Fire Slayers.
Yeah, Fire Slayers. He's probably the foremost expert on Fire Slayer play.
That's a big deal. I mean, I can't even count any. I've long since forgotten after I've hit the triple digits with Undead long ago. But for just one army, and an army that is, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a top played army. Fire Slayers are they're tough. Okay, but tough in both senses. They're tough as being tough, and they're tough to play right. So he's probably knows his stuff about Fire Slayers. Pass on to him if he wants to do a Fire Slayer video. I'd love to interview him and do an unlocking. I would love to do that because I haven't done a Fire Slayer dedicated video, and I think that with the people that are interested in playing that, it would be nice to, if he's willing, I would happy to have him on.
I'll mention it to him tonight.
Great. I'll be tuning in, probably not live because, there's too many crazy things going on right now. But, we'll do another episode. I want to talk about your elf list.
Yeah, I have a high elf list that I'd love to, like a true high elf list that I think
that's why I want it
viable. Not one of these fake hodgepodge lists. True highborn.
Because
only
highborn. I have a series that's build me a list that people submit. Now with you, it's not you submitting it to me, but it falls in line with that. It's mainly about people who are. It's also new players, obviously, who are starting armies that are Age of Sigmar specific, but there's a lot of people legacy armies, and I've had like the dwarves, I've had the Order Empire and stuff, and Bretonnians.
We've done Nurgle.
I did Wood Elves just recently. Somebody submitted and I get a lot of submissions that are duplicates, but I haven't had anybody request Fire Slayers. But I bet you there's an audience for that. And I definitely want to see your high elf, because if somebody out there has a high elf list, I've gotten the request to do high elves, but nobody submitted a list. So to showcase a high elf quality list that people could use from their existing collection, ready to go pretty much, that would be great to transition them into Age of Sigmar. Thank you again, Tom. Always a pleasure having you on.
So I have a blog on TGA now.
That's
on
right.
The Grand Alliance. And in the blog, I have included all of my table photos, this PDF that we made for our booklet. I've hosted that on there. So I will give Mitch the links to these, the photos and all that stuff to my blog, and you guys can come check it out.
I'll be happy to post it. Thanks.
More about the event.
Email that to me. I'll get it up there. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. With more to come. And don't forget, check out Warhammer Weekly tonight. Have a great day, everybody.